The Calculus of Battle by David Geimer. Performed by John Banks, Cliff Chapman, Steve Conlin, Toby Longworth, and Luis Sosa. Battle by David Geimer. Performed by John Banks, Cliff Chapman.
There is an echo. I can hear myself too. I did for a minute there.
Him. Two-dimensional. The albedo of orbiting warships conveying a glitter pattern of coded data. It was the numbers that transformed the planet into a world. Varisine, garrison world. Population 7.45 billion. The data was inloaded to Cardan Stronos' display as fast as he could read it. Golden text strolling across the inner curve of his visor. A jet of frigid vapor blasted over him as he marched under the turbofans of a Thunderhawk gunship in pre-flight and onto the embarkation deck, his honor guard close behind.
The planet is 73% overrun.
The voice of the Magos Calculi scratched at Stronos' speech centers where the flesh interfaced with the data tether.
The Navy has the alien abhorrence fleet contained for the short to medium term, but ground forces continue to spread at an exponential rate. X-loading graphics now.
The parabola splayed across Stronos' display, temporarily displacing the relentless inload of Screed to the periphery.
Armed resistance at 0.9%, roughly. The calculus prognoses certain and imminent annihilation of all Imperial presence.
I don't disagree, Magos.
Stronos' own voice, deepened and deadened by the immobility of a metallic throat and mouth, legacy of an old wound, was at least recognizable as something that once was, and still aspired to be, human.
Withdrawal is indicated. The Leviathan threatens many worlds, 18 in this subsector alone.
It is them that I am thinking of. 0.9% of 2 billion fighting men would make a material contribution to any war zone.
Questionable. You overlook your own losses, expenditure of material to refuel, rearm, and repair.
And how many men is one Space Marine worth in this war?
Do you wish for an answer, War Leader? I have one.
Stiff-muscled, particularly around the mouth, Stronos frowned behind his visor. On derricks and hanging pallets all over the flight deck, dozens of blank-faced servitors tested every bolt and rivet of every black and silver gunship for signs of stress or damage. The uniformed ratings necessary to supervise their labors saluted as Stronos and his retinue marched by the hallowed machines.
The battle calculus can be flexible.
1 + 1 always equals 2.
And if we add one again? You talk of a closed system, Magos, but I fully intend to open it up.
There was a moment's inactivity from the data tether.
Your armor's spirit informs me that you are on the embarkation deck. I take it your mind is set.
Take it as you see it, my friend.
The code presence in his organic cortex sighed.
Cost increases in line with potential gains. The ratio remains marginal.
I will work that margin.
Dispensing with any superfluous sign-off, the Magos Calculi disconnected.
What is the prognosis?
Though he was half a stride behind, Sergeant Jallinghal clearly knew who he had been communing with. They were Iron Hands. Their bond of brotherhood went deeper than mere blood and flesh. Their battle plate and bionics linked by a stream of inload exload, unbroken in almost 600 years.
Immediate insertion. We will reinforce the cordon around the Varsis Citadel and buy time for the evacuation.
This world has proven its weakness. It is a blight that should be excised.
So it was. Even brothers did not always see eye to eye.
Dead men do not learn from their errors, Sergeant.
A canker that is burned from the body will not metastasize, spreading fear and weakness to distant worlds. And for what? A few million men? Do you know how many billions are deployed to this sector alone?
Stronos looked to their Thunderhawk, bearing the silvered heraldry of the Iron Council. Deck servitors, their hands welded to massive winch handles, operated the turntable that slowly cranked the gunship's armored nose around to face the intemperate blue glare of the coherence field. Its powering turbofans filled Stronos' body with the visceral, full-body thunder of raw machine aggression. The energy field spasmed under the inky caress of the Thunderhawk's exhaust fumes. He strode towards the open assault ramp.
There are 18 million men down there, brother. A drop in the ocean, maybe. But it is my drop. My ocean.
Jallankhal dipped his cable-snarled helm in acquiescence and followed Stronos wordlessly into the gunship. The veteran iron hands of his honor guard began to lock themselves into position for launch, but Stronos stopped them.
No. No restraints, brothers.
It is protocol.
We fight not only the alien, but our own calculus. The cost of every second is measured in lives.
Stronos switched his Vox frequency to interface with the servitor pilot in the cockpit.
Ready for launch!
Jallankhal and his clave readied their weapons as the assault ramp closed on its hydraulics, and the turbofans built towards liftoff. The descent from high polar geostationary orbit to the combat zone was rapid. The clave had their weapons loaded, blessed, and triply checked. Stronos' Stormbolter communicated with his armor's core intelligence in a series of clicks and pings as it ran self-diagnostics. His relic weapon, the ancient axe of Medusa, chattered nonsense to itself as it stole tactical inloads from Stronos' armor. The servo skull wired between its cock-toothed axe blades, always hungry for raw data. The migrainous pinch of the Magos calculi interrupted his thoughts.
8%.
Even Stronos' advanced war gear was struggling to punch a Vox signal through the psychoelectric field distortions of the hive mind. But the words from the neural tether were clear.
That is the potential benefit to loss ratio of your current action. 8%.
Stronos ignored him. His attention was split between the tactical charts in his visor display and its accompanying screed.
Bring us down. Grid Zeta 3. It is easy terrain, and the line there is crumbling. If it falls, the Tyranids will be on the walls in minutes. Order all inbound Thunderhawks to deploy to adjacent grids, a half ring from Epsilon 18 to the range of hills encroaching from Zeta 1. Then to provide additional air cover to the evacuation craft.
Jallankhal nodded in approval.
A wall of iron, but it will not endure indefinitely against such numbers.
The flesh is weak, brother.
Some weaker than others.
Stronos clasped his brother's pauldron, a pre-battle ritual that Jallankhal had never yet decided to acknowledge. No one walked into punishment like an iron hand. The assault ramp lowered, even as the Thunderhawk leveled out, the ramp wobbling in a ferocious wind. It was a dry world. The briefing inloads had told him that, but seeing it for himself was different. It was windswept, coppery and dark. The tactical charts that flickered across his display to keep pace with the gunship described a prehistoric ocean basin. The gross contours Stronos could still see, but everything less had been flooded beneath a seething tide of alien filth. Chitinous bodies rushed like seawater over rocks, and even over the engine thunder of the gunship's fans, Stronos could hear the clacking of segmented legs and hideously irrational body plans. The great devourer swept beneath him towards the static guns of the Imperial Guard. Stronos had no stomach, but he still felt sickened by it. Jallankhal raised a fist.
Praise the Omnissiah for the Leviathan. We demonstrate the weakness of flesh today.
Stronos nodded.
Let us unbalance the calculus.
Then he stepped off the ramp. He smashed into the tide like a colossal bomb, dropped by an overflying marauder. bone shards and alien blood spraying high into the air. The tremendous mass of his augmented Terminator plate and servo harness drove him into the ground, when a lesser body would have been bowled through the swarm after the gunship. He rose from his knees with a cry of actuators, Tyranid warrior forms by the thousand already thundering towards him with a single, irresistible will. His storm bolter gave a blur as it ranked targets from 1 all the way to 999 and established a fire pattern. He fired. Alien bodies burst as he sprayed the scrabbling beast with bolter shells. A termagant with 2 thick rows of spines running along its back managed to scramble between exploding bodies and pounced. Stronos beheaded it with a single swipe of his axe. The weapon's servo mind muttered as it consumed the feast of kill data, reluctantly passing scraps to Stronos' display. The screed had not paused for a moment, but had been shunted to the side again to allow his tactically augmented reality to become the main focus. Brightly defined blocks scrolled down the edges of his display, appraising him of the Xenos creature's bone density, muscle distribution, death reflexes, and the exact amount of force necessary to kill it. That amount of force was exactly what Stronos hammered into the neck of the next beast that tried to gallop past him. Another scrabbled in behind, bounded onto the first alien's corpse, then sprung off just as Stronos swung for it. The quick shift in direction fooled his combat algorithms and spared its neck at the expense of its groin. It appeared to feel no pain as the axe of Medusa hacked it open, but slithered to the ground in a welter of gore, its legs suddenly unable to bear its weight. Stronos stamped on it, the force of his heavily reinforced armor driven down through his heel.
4%.
The Magos Calculi's reasoned modulation amidst the alien stampede was jarring.
It drops so quickly.
You have unbalanced the equation, as I believe was your intention. Every second removes more Imperial resource from the world. By your actions, and the actions of your gunship pilots, are the benefits of such action diminished.
The hiss click of his storm bolter's autoloaders seamlessly interjected into the hard roar of gunfire. He shattered the skull of a Hormigaunt, refusing to retreat a single stride, and then drew a tasteless breath of his armor's purified air. It was the first he had needed since embarkation. His machine lungs were commendably efficient.
But I do miss the taste of alien blood on my lips.
He was tracking the active runes of his clave with his organic eye. Clad in power armor, their lesser mass had necessitated a more conventional deployment. But the clave advanced now. War machines in approximated human form, stark and black, gunmetal grills and gorget bundles underlit by the blaze of semi-automatic fire. Automatic status updates blinked between their armor systems and their war leaders as they drew close, but not a word was wasted in greeting. Stronos expected none. He looked back, his first real-world glimpse of the beleaguered Varsis citadel. He grunted hollowly. It had seemed more formidable in schematic. A ragged cheer rang out as an armored fist squadron, 4 beat-up chimeras, escorted by a Lehman Russ, with guardsmen clinging to cargo netting on the vehicle's hulls, trundled towards the Iron Hands. The escorting battle tank clattered on one creaking track, dropping slowly off the pace, belching off black smoke each time its frustrated driver tried to up gear and make up the distance on the transports. Jallinghal shredded a pair of Tyranid warrior forms with bursts of bolter fire.
Unexpected reinforcements!
For the second time in one day, Stronos' facial muscles tried to force an expression where there could be none. Centuries he had lived as one of the Iron Hands, and still, mortals could surprise him.
They come to our aid.
What manner of angels do they choose to see in us, I wonder?
Ratio now at 2% within the margin of error.
We are the sources of that error, Magos. I will make the margin what I wish it to be.
Stronos disconnected from the link, then issued his armor a mental command to isolate the platoon commander's frequency and open a channel.
Return to the inner defensive line. We cannot hold them here. Turn back!
The response was a hash of static. The platoon's systems lacked the power of a standard Adeptus Astartes squad's war gear, much less that of an Iron Hand's command clave. Stronos modulated his own signal power to compensate.
This is Lieutenant Jarrow, requesting. Drone for you. Order.
Stronos held the signal power there,
Reverse, Lieutenant. Your priority is the evacuation. Turn back now.
Panicked noises punctuated the static. Stronos saw the Lehman Russ's long turret cannon begin to traverse. Levitating above the smaller bioforms, like a fetal deformity displayed on an invisible cushion, was an atrophied creature with a cranium so vast that it appeared to have withered its own limbs in order to feed its growth. Its eyes began to glow until torrid incandescence seeped through the gaps in its exoskeleton. There was a pulse, just as Stronos' optics began to burr in protest of the witchlight, and a bolt of energy jabbed from the alien's cranial ridge towards the row of vehicles. A synapse blinked later, and an implosive crack peeled out from one of the chimeras. The tank managed to rumble a few meters on, then flipped into the air with a bubble of green-veined lightning, opening its hull from the inside, shedding screaming guardsmen as it somersaulted once and crashed to the ground on its roof. Then, the tank's battle cannon fired. The Lehman Russ rocked back and the creature vanished in a maelstrom of vindictive counter-annihilation worthy of an ally of the Iron Hands. Smoke rose from the tank's motive units. The big gun's recoil had finally done for the damaged track, and the Lehman Russ ground to a terminal halt. A swarm of smaller Tyranids scuttled in through the wreckage, smoke and debris. Multi-lasers and sponson-mounted heavy bolters mowed down their numbers, but they were too many and too fast. Stronos bellowed at the swarmed tanks.
Reverse!
Fire! Fire! All guns now! Fire!
Stronos steeled himself as lasfire stitched out from the vehicles. Numbered brackets enclosed targets of choice. The axe of Medusa excitedly shunted reserve power to its blades.
Clave Stronos, new objective. Exterminate.
Jalanghal swung his bolter from the main swell of the tide.
Confirmed! Exterminate!
His words were cut short by a Tyranid blade lift. The gigantic warrior form was twice the height of a space marine, upright, encased in thick bone armor that soaked up the Clave's snapshot fire as it hacked through ceramite and iron to cleave off Jalanghal's arm at the elbow. The second of 4 switching blades reversed back, then rammed up to skewer the veteran Iron Hand through the belly, serrated bone erupting between his shoulders in a welter of sparks. Damage signifiers turned a portion of Stronos' visor display red.
Brother!
Calmly, Jalanghal lifted his bolter one-handed and blasted the monster's face apart. Only once he was mathematically convinced of its death did he then shoot through the arm attached to the impaling blade and drop, the bone sword still embedded in him.
Brother, are you combat effective?
The sergeant responded with a hail of fire into the swarm.
A flesh wound. If a Tyranid intends to fell an Iron Hand of my age, then it will need to be more thorough.
Stronos turned his fire on the warrior forms assailing his brothers. The guardsmen were on their own. He felt the shockwave as the Lehman Russ's shell store detonated, blowing off the tank's turret. The remaining chimeras belatedly backed up, slowly, finding it tough going through the swarm of gaunts that had already got between them and the defense lines. Stronos moved ponderously through the melee of hammering bolters and hissing claws. A large Tyranid warrior struggling in the grip of his servo arm. Bioacid and bone missiles scratched the gilt from his armor. But he knew, as Jalanghal had known, that he could take the punishment. Therein lay the true power of the calculus. To ensure that victory was certain before ever setting foot on a world. Hearing the scream of descending turbofans, he looked up into the white glare of spotlights and a brutal downwash that tossed dust across his faceplate. The gunship came down, pre-emptying the data mission that he had known was coming.
Ratio at 0, War Leader. There is nothing further to be gained.
I know.
The gunship's underwing heavy bolters murdered the ground beneath it, enough to lower its ramp. Jalanghal and the Honor-Clave stomped towards it, their own bolters overlapping meticulously to keep the swarm from the aircraft. Last to go, Stronos turned to watch as a pack of Hormagaunts leapt into the back of one of the chimeras. Screams tore across the box, one longer and more immediate in its agony than the others. The tank had evidently been Jarrow's. The last spits of lasfire sputtered out, heavier bioforms with massive rending tusks chewing through the stranded vehicles. Stronos kept his compassion for humanity alive by keeping it cold, locked forever in iron like an undying corpse in the body of a dreadnought. And he turned his gaze to the ocean of purple and white carapace that seethed towards the faltering siege guns of the citadel. It had been a long time since Cardan Stronos had been truly afraid, but he thought he could imagine the terror that would soon grip the people of Varsis. His helm pictures recorded the scene. It would almost certainly be useful data to somebody, one day.
Terminate the evacuation. Recall all chapter vessels.
He could hear the desperate pleas of the tank crew, through the metal of the last Chimera's armor, and through the vox bead of Lieutenant Jarrow, whose lifeless ear must have been pressed against it. He ignored them. Ultimately, they were all merely numbers in an equation.
Vulcan's Shield by Nick Kine. Read by Gareth Armstrong, Martin Ellis, and Jonathan Keeble. A dull explosion resonated through the hull of Firewyvern. The Thunderhawk gunship bucked against the resulting pressure wave, throwing up emergency icons inside the troop hold. Displaced shrapnel caromed off its armor in a burst of muffled plinks.
Another like that, and we'll be going the rest of the way on foot, if at all.
Kotankadai smiled. His burning eyes flared with amusement in the gloom, limning his onyx-black skin in a visceral red.
Their aim is worse than yours, Fugis. It's nothing.
Apothecary Fugis scowled at his captain, his thin face drawn so tightly it was almost sharp.
It's a needless risk.
Kadai had stopped listening. His gaze traveled down the troop hold, along the grav harnesses, where the rest of his warriors were locked in. Armored in green battleplate, the snarling orange drake icon of the Third Company upon their left pauldrons, they were salamanders, the Fireborn. Like their captain, the eyes of his retinue glowed red behind their helmet lenses. The effect was almost infernal. Despite the restrictive confines of the Firewyvern, they still managed to perform their pre-battle rituals. Enkelm led them. It was his duty.
In Vulcan's image are we crafted. Our bodies are his immutable instruments.
Kadai watched the veteran sergeant reach into a fiery brazier wrought into a support column and withdraw a fistful of burning coals. The others echoed him, Vekshen and Shenkar. Together they crushed the coals into dust and used the hot soot to anoint their armor.
"What is that?"
remarked another warrior in the hold. This one was not a salamander. He wore the black ceramite of the Raven Guard. His left pauldron carried his chapter's icon, a white raven with outstretched wings. Where salamanders were onyx black, the Raven Guard was stark white, with eyes like tiny shards of jet. Together, they were a contrast in chiaroscuro. Vekshen had scribed the effigy of a dragon's head upon his forearm.
Ungala, the great drake whose mantle I wear, slain in ritual combat.
The company champion touched the scaled cloak draped over his back and carefully fashioned around his power armor's generator.
I carry this sigil to honor him and grant me fortitude in battle.
Yours is a savage culture, Nocturnian.
The remark was directed at Kadai, who turned to face the speaker.
The Promethean Creed is not for everyone, Adrak.
The Raven Guard stared through the dark lenses of his white battle helm. The bulky jump pack on his back made him lean forwards in his grav harness. It gave a false sense of earnestness that Sergeant Adrak Vraver didn't feel. He and 3 more of his battle brothers had hitched a ride on Firewyvern, pledging to aid Kadai in his extraction mission. The two went back a long way. Vraver was a veteran of dozens of campaigns. Kadai had served in some of those in his 2 centuries and more of service.
And I suppose your stubbornness is kindled from the same embers.
There was mirth in the Raven Guard's tone that Kadai couldn't see. Outside, the explosions intensified. The interior shuddered constantly. Metal groaned in abject protest as they rode a storm of ordnance.
Not too late to go back. Our battle brothers are pulling out, Khotan. This city is lost, but the war is won. There's nothing for the Space Marines here. Let the Guard flatten it.
Kadai laughed, but it didn't reach his blazing eyes. Perhaps that was true for the Raven Guard. Prosecuting a guerrilla war behind enemy lines, they had crippled communications, sabotaged transport links, and executed several insurgent officers, including the world's corrupt Lord Governor. For Kadai, however, the mission was not yet ended.
Months ago, before undertaking this mission, a neophyte remarked something to me on the Sindara Plateau back on Nocturne. Do you know what he said?
Vraver relaxed his lightning claw in a gesture for Kadai to continue.
My lord, the Promethean Creed tells us that nothing is above the sanctity of human life, that we are Vulcan's shield, here to protect the innocent and defend the weak. But when I awoke in the Sanatorium, after 7 months of endurance and solitude, I found I had become a monster.
Kadai touched his skin, dragging the eyelid down a fraction to show the red heat within.
How then, he asked me, can we be our Primarch's shield if we look like this?
Firewyvern shook violently from another aerial bombardment, but Vraver and Kadai didn't flinch. From the cockpit, through the internal Vox, Brother Hecken relayed that they were closing on their objective.
60 seconds. What was your answer?
Kadai spread his hands as if it was obvious.
Because we must.
As simple as that. I always admired your frankness, Khotan. You salamanders are such pragmatists, even when your very appearance betrays your ideals.
Firewyvern's engines were screaming. The gunship was banking into a sharp dive. Kadai could feel the inertia even through his power armor. Heavy cannon fire boomed through the hull, muffled slightly by the gunship's plating.
30 seconds.
It is because of what we are that we can be Vulcan's shield. Triumph over adversity, self-sacrifice, and the capacity to endure comes from this.
He gestured towards his diabolic features.
By being less human on the outside, we are made more human inside.
Kadai touched his breastplate where a symbolic flame was rendered in gold.
The burning core of our righteousness and the belief in our duty and all the Promethean Creed comes from within.
10 seconds. 9,
Kadai donned his helmet. Like his armor, it was finely artificed. It depicted a snarling drakehead. Its scales echoed in the captain's battleplate.
1.
The deployment ramp of Firewyvern opened slowly. Heat and sound rushed in. Having disengaged his grav harness, Kadai mounted the ramp first. Brother Hecken had brought them low. 30 meters down, fire wreathed Echelon City in a crackling veil. The once regal avenues burned. Plazas fluttered with the charred remains of anti-imperial propaganda leaflets. Bodies of loyal citizens and cultists alike littered roads clogged with blood and rubble. One structure remained. Blasted ruins filled with chaos insurgents surrounded it. 3 battalions, over 1,000 troops moved into position. Their heavy gun emplacements had taken a toll on the Skola's marble walls. Columns were toppled. Statues of prominent alumni were beheaded and defiled. Soon it would be no more. The Space Marines had arrived just in time. A visual feed in Kadai's ornate helm revealed that Navy ordnance would be unleashed from suborbit in less than 6.3 minutes and counting. Only ash would remain afterwards. Hecken drew them closer still. Heavy bolters from the Thunderhawk's wings and forward fuselage raked a cannon battery, wheeling around to get a bead. Simple brown flak armor and the hoods of their debased cult availed them nothing. The heretics disappeared in a storm of blood and debris. Kadai unhitched a pair of crack grenades maglocked to his belt. The roof of the Schola hove into view. It had been damaged and would yield with little force. Kadai cast down the grenades, priming them with a 3-second timer. Vreva loosed 2 more. The detonation was fast and loud. In a cloud of smoke and flame, the Schola roof collapsed. Several young faces and the older visage of an abbot peered up through the clearing dust at the angels in the war-blackened sky above. Salvation had come.
Tell me, brother.
Vreva was readying to drop, then engage the thrusters of his jump pack.
This precocious neophyte, what is his name?
The salamander briefly met the Raven Guard's gaze. Kadai's eyes flared, his emotion unclear.
Dakir,
he replied, leaping off the ramp and into the Schola below.
Hazon Dakir. Hazon